Yeah, so I think welcome. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we're going to flip the script a little bit. We're going to talk a bit about hardware, but we're also going to talk about what it takes to actually get hardware out in the wild. So the theme for this topic basically is heavy industries like construction, mining, supply chain, oil and gas. They all have a huge role they can play in the energy transition and in dealing with climate change. But there are some challenges with working in those industries. They are slow to adopt new technologies. They have large capital expenditures associated with anything they do, so the timelines are long. And they also tend to be pretty risk averse, which goes hand in hand with spending lots of money. So at MistyWest, we work with a bunch of companies that sell into these spaces. One thing we've observed a few times now is where a company will create a new product, get it out there in the market, do some pilots, and then nothing. Like they have some pilots, they even agree on KPIs for those pilots that if you hit them, everything is going to go great, and we're gonna order it after that, and then nothing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why does that happen? How can we do better there? And what are some changes that hopefully we can see in the industry to speed things up? So that's the background. I think maybe we'll just get straight into questions then. The first question I had was for Michelle. You've seen commercialization in legacy industries from three perspectives, both pushing it in a startup, but also working within an established enterprise, Trimble. And now you're seeing it from all different sides as an EIR at UBC. So the question I wanted to ask was, how can you tell if a company or an individual is making progress selling into these large organizations, or if they're just being strung along? Like, what are the signs that success has associated with it, and what are the signs that, yeah, they're just dragging their feet and they're probably not going to move forward, even though it sounds positive? Maybe that's a particularly Canadian problem, where people aren't able to tell you no.
Oh, I got a mic. Thanks, Taylor. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I see some familiar faces, and thanks for having us on this panel. So yes, I have dealt through my entire career with big industry and being in the perpetual trial process. There's a number of key elements that from my past experience that is really I see over and over again in these big industries that where you're seeing, whether you're making progress or not, I think is kind of the gist of the question. The first one, of course, is that you're talking terms and conditions on a contract, or you have a signed contract. It's pretty clear that you're in a good position. But with that aside, there are a few areas that come up over and over again where we go, I think we're seeing some progress here. First and foremost, it's the level of engagement with the company. So if they are really working with you on preparing a working plan or a project plan, I don't care what you call it, because everybody has a different name for it. If you have them helping you prepare that working plan, it is a really big sign that they are fully engaged in making this happen. That engagement plan or that working plan is going to have micro commitments in them, and there will be triggers that will show when commercialization will take place. So right at the very beginning of that project, they know that if you can fulfill these particular milestones, you're going to be moving into a commercialization effort. And that is often where I see the companies in those perpetual trials, because they're just trialing and trialing. There's no set indications that after we do this, you said that we'd move to a commercial state. So that's one spot that we see we know we're making progress when they're working with us on those working plans, and there's the milestones and success criteria built into those. The second piece is they have assigned a project manager to that project. they're already putting money in right there and then, but with that project manager on the other side, they are there to make sure that project goes as smooth as it can and to introduce you to the ecosystem and who's responsible to move those things, who's got to deal with safety, who has to deal with all those things. It's absolutely critical that that person is there championing for them and helping you move that project through. And the third piece I don't have time to go through today, but anybody that's worked with me before will know all of these particular routes, but you need involvement from the key players, the key decision makers in that organization. And there's 5 big players that you have to have involved. If they're not involved, they need to be at least they know what's going on in that project, and you're CCing all those people as you go through that project. That is absolutely critical. And again, another spot where we see perpetual trials happening, or interest does not equal traction. They'll set up projects with individual key players, but not all of the key players in that project. And, little do they know that they have all these other people that they have to get approval from to kind of get through that project. So it's a process where you have to have all the key players, all the stakeholders at play. And we're at Manning Elliott, but usually the CFO is called the CFNO. And so you have to have them on your side in order for that project to kind of move forward. And finally, I'll say that if they're looking for budget for that project, also very, very clear sign that things are moving forward for what you need to do. So I've got story after story after story where there's one player, key person in that ecosystem that isn't aware what's going on that project, and that project has failed because of that one single person that you didn't have involved in your project. So that's kind of what I would say in terms of that. And I think, are you next on the question?
Does anybody have anything they want to add?
Maybe I'll add one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. First time here, and I feel like I'm in a room full of very, very smart people, so hopefully I can live up to the expectation. Thank you. RFPs, anyone done an RFP or responded to an RFP? Yeah? Really interesting process. So with YVR, we don't necessarily assign our entire budget for a project at the RFP stage. We just pay for the RFP. Sometimes it doesn't mean that project is actually going to happen. So just be wary of that kind of stuff. Some companies don't necessarily commit, even though they've put something out there to say, hey, we want to do something. Sometimes the project won't get funded. So just don't invest too much in that side of it after it's completed, and even if you've been successful and you've been selected.
Hey, I'm Mike Funk from Motion Metrics. We're primarily mining industry company, and so a lot of this experience is just from mining. But one of the things that we learned a long time ago, just like most of you guys in the room, we make cool stuff. We talk to people who are excited about cool stuff and make fast friends. But that isn't necessarily where the checkbook comes in. And so you think you have advocacy and maybe decision making, but you don't. So one of the tests that we'll do, even though when you have a new product or you're trying to partner, you want to get in and make it as easy as possible to start trialing and working together, we really push for a level of paid trialing. And it can be, a low level, but it's a test to see, does this advocate have the ability to get a little bit of funding? And it's also a test to see what are the steps and the requirements to get that funding. And if that works, and then another thing it tests is, are they going to be committed? Are they willing to put a little bit of skin in the game so that you don't have these perpetual trials and they're not picking up the phone or some new guy comes in? It's like, hey, we're in this together a little bit. So that's another thing that we learned that I would recommend in those cases too.
Or did we cover it all?
Oh. I think there's so much to say about this topic. So, and your questions are gonna.
It's almost like this is a thing. Go ahead. You're good, or you want to?
Go to the next one.
Okay, next one.
It's gonna tie.
It might even be you next. I gotta read my notes here.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Guess who's next? So at Chrysalix, you've been investing in the space since before it was cool. I would say it's become a lot cooler lately. We'll see if that's still true after the Inflation Reduction Act disappears. But you funded companies like General Fusion, Savante, MindSense, for example. I'm sure you've seen a couple of corporate restructurings, maybe some leadership changes. What lessons have emerged from that? How have the companies in your portfolio built trust quickly? And how did they recover from losing that key stakeholder in the middle of the process?
Okay, so this ties in a bit to kind of everything that we're talking about. Selling to heavy industry is hard. There's just barriers, there's inertia. So, as you described, you have so many different stakeholders that can derail the process. So one of the things that we are always looking for to think about what drives your product into industry and pulls it, is there has to be tremendous value creation. So the value that your product is creating for that kind of end industry, for that end customer. And then when you have this big value that is created, suddenly the C-suite, the CFO, the CEO, the people who can really push through different barriers are involved. So that's the first thing, kind of my first piece of answer, and that's why it kind of ties to this. The second piece is absolutely true. Organizations, these large organizations change. There's constantly different people coming in. So you can have a project champion, like you were saying, that you think has the capability to pull your product, to be a champion of your product, but then who disappears. They were rotated out to a different part of the organization. So how we see our different portfolio companies surviving that is a couple different things. Is one, again, that mapping of stakeholders at different levels, and then also the fact that they have to get that attention at the highest level. Because then that brings, even if the person in the project, people underneath are changing, then the executives are finding a way to push that project through or to make sure to check in and get you there. So really it's that value creation and then making sure, as we were talking about, that a great example is mining. In mining, you often have a corporate structure where, the techs of the world there's a corporate structure, but then they own lots of different mines. And at the mine, there's effectively a general manager, a CEO for that specific mine. And there can be kind of different departments within that. Our companies often need to build champions both at that corporate level and at that mine level. So you got to figure out whatever it is for your industry that's the equivalent and really kind of go chase that and understand that.
Okay, maybe just add to that. One of the things that I work with a lot of startups, and they're not sure what the value creation is. They know that they have something that really is probably going to be useful and produce a lot of value, but they're not sure exactly what it is. So we encourage the startups to find a strategic partner in the industry that they're in, and there's a whole process around that. But that is going to allow them to build that that techno-economic analysis that needs to be done around the costs and the benefits and the kind of the risk assessment for those particular companies, build those case studies, present those case studies, get the trust that's needed in the industry because that's the only way that really they can figure out what that value proposition is back to those big industries. So that's just in kind of adding to what you're saying. Anything else, you guys?
Go for it.
So that's where the advocate who's really into your tech can help you out, because generally they're going to be measured with some sort of productivity or safety outcome that they're looking for. And so those are the clues to get you started, to make sure that the value that you think you have is aligned with how the executive and decision-making group sees it. But if you're selling B2B, it's also going to be a dollar situation. So you have to know how those tons or hours or gallons of fuel play into a financial outcome somehow. And if you have that, I was just telling someone tonight, business people are simple people. And it doesn't mean, they're one-trick ponies, but they have one major trick that they always have to play, and that is to have a return on the investment. And so if you can quantify that in the way that they measure it, not the way that you see it or how you feel about it, but speaking in their own language and being able to turn it into their dollars, it makes everything go a lot smoother. And that doesn't solve everything, but that's a huge start, and these advocates can clue you in because they're usually measured in the same way. And so you ask them like, hey, what is success for you and how's that quantified? And that's a great start to not only like see the value, like I'm helping you produce more tonnage, but this is what it does for you in terms of dollars. So if you give me 1, I can give you 3. And that's sounds simple, but it can be very hard. But these guys can help you do that.
That's good.
I'll ask a quick follow-up there, which is, what if they don't want to tell you where their, lever that you pulled to spit out money is? Like, is it easy to just ask an executive when you get to a certain point, like, hey, how are you compensated? What are your KPIs or whatever? Like, or do they tend to be guarded about that? If you're not at that stage, you have to build a relationship first. I don't know. This could be Mike.
Yeah,
An answer to.
I'll just take a first crack at this and say that those KPIs are a problem that they need to have solved, and often they need help with it. So they're quite willing to talk about that from that standpoint.
I'll just add one thing, and that is, I find with big industry, they don't know themselves what the cost of things are. So you need to bring that to the table. That's why the analysis needs to be done beforehand, before you go there. You need to show them this is how the economics are going to work, because a lot of businesses don't know how much it costs them to run their business today. So you have to be very prepared for that going into some of these big industries.
The other thing I'll add there is corporate strategy. If you're working with a company that has a public corporate strategy and it's on their website, a lot of that is going to be sort of directed at how they're going to compensate their employees in achieving their corporate strategy. So that's just something you can do subliminally without even talking to anyone, is know their strategy and understand where they're looking longer term.
Yeah. So in mining, sometimes that's a trap for us, honestly, because there's a lot of greenwashing in the industry. And so if you go to their corporate strategy, they're like, oh, we really care about this. Well, will you give me $1 if I help you solve that problem? It's like, So, but what you can do is, again, figure out what these other value propositions are. So if we save energy for the mine, they pay for energy. So it's like, okay, you get the money and you get this great, legitimate link to your corporate strategy. But would you only pay us for the sustainability savings if there wasn't a financial impact? In our industry, no, but I know other industries are better. And so, there's a stronger value proposition even if there's not a financial. So that's just, like I said, an issue maybe more specific to our industry, but you got to be careful for that. And again, that's where that test comes from. If they give you the $1, then they're serious. But to your question, Taylor, will they just like open kimono, here's how we're measured? So Motion Metrics is a subsidiary of a very big company. And so if I went there with my big company hat, no way. Because they know I'm trying to sell them, some big thing, and they're more guarded. But honestly, like when I started working with Motion, what I found is that they were quite open with smaller companies because they didn't feel, this is just like some sleazy pitch or something like that. There's legit interest in working together to do cool things and solve problems mutually. And it just takes a while where you can demonstrate that integrity, I guess. And they do actually start sharing some of the metrics. But I've found it takes some trust building. It's not like a day one thing generally, although they absolutely have problems we can solve. And so it is in their best interest. We're not just trying to trick folks into buying our products. We're trying to solve problems, but not on day one always.
Thank you. And I guess, note to self, it's a day one problem if I get Michelle to help me with it. So next time, just... Give you some notice, yeah. No, but you made a great point there about, finding someone experienced who understands the industry and understands the real costs associated with what they're doing. Because I think that's human nature, right? If it's something you've always done a certain way, it tends to just be like, that's the way we do it. We're not going to inspect that. It's just assumed. And then, you have to have numbers to make them look sometimes, I guess. Hopefully ones they don't disagree with. Okay, so next question. This one's going to go to you, Jason. In the tech ecosystem, so like software tech, there's a common mantra which is move fast and break things. But in hardware, that doesn't always play out very well. In our experience, sometimes we find you have to go slow to go fast. At YVR, you took Border Express from really from problem definition to an international success. It was very much like here's a problem, how do we fix it? How do you know when your product is ready for adoption? How do you know when your hardware is at a stage where you can push it out the door at a large risk-averse organization where the costs of failure are, say, extremely long lineups or something like that? I guess that's not the worst risk, but yeah.
Trust me, for YVR, we don't like lines. Yeah, it was a really interesting journey with Border Express, which is what we call our kiosk program. We were quite lucky because we had such a big problem. We had a huge problem where we didn't have the ability to process passengers in a timely manner to actually get them off planes and get them into Canada. We had to hold them on planes. Our facility was full of people, and it was just a terrible experience. And this is going back 2007, 2006. So have you ever traveled into YVR internationally? Anyone did that? Anyone had that bad experience? Ever since then, ever since we've obviously employed Border Express, we've obviously we've more than doubled the capacity of the building without having to build bricks and mortar, without having to hire new people. So it's a great product. But I think to the question, how do you know you're ready? I think you have to have it out there. You have to have it trialed. You have to see people use it if it's something that people are using. You have to know how to support it and be able to help support it if you are selling to other airports and have the support mechanisms in place. You have to have stock. You have to have all of these things, all of these checks and balances in place behind the scenes before you go out there, because we certainly did make mistakes ourselves where we were supporting other airports and we weren't ready to do that, and ultimately the product suffered because of that. Yeah, and I think robust technology is key to that. Again, our kiosks, we built these things in BC, made in BC. Great BC success story. We've never had to replace a kiosk because they're just so robust. But we do, we replace peripherals and those sorts of things. But they really are resilient. I think that's.
What could you have done differently to avoid that friction when you went international?
As I say, it's having the support, making sure, like when you go to market and you can say you can do all of these things, you can tick all of these boxes and say, yes, we can give you the kiosks, we can provide the support services you need, we can provide the training. What we didn't do is provide good training, and we didn't have good support. So ultimately, you don't get more sales, you don't get the success of the product, it fails because a certain airport might not be as successful. So those are the main things, but then obviously, because we were working in a border control environment where we had to work with CBSA, with US CBP, with other international border agencies, privacy is a huge thing, and that's where we put a lot of focus on. So it depends on the product, I think, but yeah. Anyone else?
I was just thinking as you were talking about that from some of the other big industries that I've kind of worked with over the many years, is that they have been more and more and more inundated with innovations, and so they weren't sure really what to do with all these innovations. Some of the operations would implement some and try them out, but they weren't having that great of success to kind of move them throughout their companies. So they've created some of these corporate venture arms to try and funnel innovation in, so they're not making those kind of mistakes over and over and over again, and taking a more of a kind of a high-level approach to bringing in some of the innovation into some of these companies. Now, I just wanted to make a point that we have not seen a lot of successes of implementations, even through the corporate venture arms. So it's still not going to get you that much faster into some of these companies because there's a lot of gates that you're going through. But I just wanted to say that some of the industries have tried to address some of these problems that they've been having, trying to implement innovation by putting in some of these corporate venture arms. So,
Mike, anything you want to add to, or?
I mean, let's see. So I buy crappy things and I buy really nice things. And so, again, based on the companies I've seen here, I think we want to sell nice things that work. And so at Motion, we've sold things before they're scalable, and that was good for our learning. And but you have to manage customer expectations. You can't make your advocate look bad. And so you got to put a lot of energy into the support and then even the sales team to be able to manage those expectations. But it's hard to scale because I think we also want to be so successful that lots of people are selling our things, and sales guys get scared if they're selling a product that's going to make them look bad and fail. So I do think, to the initial question, you can, break some eggs, and you can have some customers forgive you, but those are special customers and they need to be treated differently. But I don't think it scales very well. So that's we've spent probably a good portion of the past 2 years with our engineering team perfecting our products. So we had them, let's say 90% of the way there, and we've really focused on getting the 100, and that's paid off. So I think the journey's different for every product, every company, industry, but that's been our experience. You can you can roll some things out that maybe aren't robust enough, but you got to get there. So you got to continue that commitment, or else you won't scale.
So I want to add 2 thoughts on this. One is that this idea that there's certain areas in these heavy industries where you can't fail. Things like safety. You talked about privacy kind of in your, for the airports and the border agencies. So things like that, that's where it's different. So figure out kind of what are those things where you can't fail. And the other one is that those early adopters. So you kind of sparked this thought, Mike, but there are, you'll have different customers or potential customers out there. As best as you can, identify the ones that have a bit more of that innovation culture, that innovation mindset that want to work with you to solve the problem, especially for your first customer, because they'll be more forgiving if your product is not perfect.
Great advice all around. At MistyWest, we try to have a mantra of no surprises. Things can go wrong, but it can't be a complete surprise. So I loved your point about expectation management. I think that plays an important part of getting started. And then your point about, there's some things that can't fail. One thing that comes to mind is Cruise, the self-driving car company that killed somebody. They imploded pretty quick. And I know other people working on autonomous haul trucks and things like that. The CEO of Safe AI was telling me to succeed in this industry, you just have to be the last person to make a mistake. So I don't. That's not intended to throw shade or anything, but just it's an interesting way of thinking about it because there are some risks that are so large, you can't encounter them, so you have to make sure that you at least reach that bar. So I think that's a really good point. Mike, this question's for you. So I think, I was mentioning in the last question, the kind of tech has this ethos of move fast and break things. Tech has also enabled us to have more diverse sales models. So not everything is I give you dollars, you give me physical thing. So there's now everybody wants to make their thing something as a service, software as a service, hardware as a service. The worst one I've heard is solution as a service. I'm not even sure what that means. At Weir, you've navigated these trends in a pretty Capex heavy industry, which is mining. What sales models have worked for you, and kind of what are the pros and cons for using different sales models and say for trying to sell your product as a Capex expense versus as an OpEx expense. Shout out to our accountant hosts who hopefully have a thing or two to say about this.
So speaking of shout outs, where are the Motion Metrics employees? All right. Thank you for coming. Where are the former Motion Metrics employees? Sarush? Yes, in the back. Thank you. Yes, we got a few of those too. So, okay, the Capex question. So if you want to play the game, you got to know the rules. And I think a lot of folks think, oh, if we just take the cost of this item and chop it up into 36 pieces and, bill monthly, we can escape the rules. But that's actually not how it works. Between IFRS, US GAAP, Canadian GAAP, there are some accounting rules that will turn these kind of deals, and we're talking hardware here, we're at the hardware meetup, software is different set of rules, that can turn it into a finance lease that has to be capitalized. So there's some rules that you need to understand. So my tip there is to reach out to Mike. Where did he go? In the back. Yeah, make sure you have a great commercial accountant because they can help you navigate that first set of rules. And then there's a second set of rules that's going to be specific to the customer. Again, we work with big mining customers, sometimes contractors, but mostly the sites. And that's its own ecosystem. But they have, and we're all over the world, so they have their own set of rules. And in some cases, we've learned these rules one at a time. So you take a couple steps forward, it's like, oh, stop. Now purchasing needs this form filled out. And then, oh, stop. Now it needs to go to, the chief no officer. By the way, I have my finance business partner here tonight, so I got to kind of mind the rules. And you can learn this iteratively, but that's really tough. So again, if you can use the advocate to help understand the rules, put some of these things out there first, maybe you can figure out how to dodge it or at least navigate the Capex piece better. But you can go subscription and still, when you sell a hardware product, escape some of the Capex requirements. So, but like I said, country and company is going to be a little different, and you do not want to learn that iteratively because it could last years. This is a true story that's happening right now. Our biggest sale of the year, which we got agreement from our advocate, who is a decision maker, a year ago, and I've put the stuff on the plane, and it is halfway around the world. We have not made that sale yet. And I saw the form, and I'm not kidding, 27 signatures. We have 21 as of 3 hours ago. And it's been, hung up. Now, this is an especially crappy approval process, so it's kind of an exception. But we're learning the hard way, and it's costing us a lot to do that. So anything you can do with the advocate to understand, hey, how does the paperwork work? What are some of the accounting rules? I know probably you're not here because you wanted to know accounting rules, but unfortunately it's part of that evil, and subscription isn't going to save you. Because like I said, even though you chop it up into pieces and charge periodically, it can still turn into a Capex situation.
I can maybe just add something to that. So one of the things, again, that I see more successful than not is when you have some of these big, huge capital expense hardware that you're putting into these companies, is we have to think creatively about how we can speed up the process of getting these pieces in, or the equipment into these big, huge mining, forestry, agriculture companies. And so sometimes you really do have to think out of the box and decide, can we technically, what quick win can we get by maybe pulling some of this apart and just getting it in there quick? It might even simply be you're the expert in that particular whatever hardware you're selling into. Go in and give them some advice and figure out what's going on. How do they buy? What's the best model for them? There's so many different ways that you can get in there by figuring out, just step back. You're not putting in the whole product right now. That's okay. Find a quick win. Get in there, figure it out, understand what is going to be successful, and then take it to them and get some trust. Of course, that's the main thing. And then you can move to the bigger and bigger and bigger kind of pieces as you go through. So we've seen pretty successful with some of our big projects.
I had a follow-up question for you, Mike, which is 27 signatures, that's a lot. Is there anyone in the world who knew that you were going to need 27 signatures a year ago?
Anyone in the world?
Yeah. And my follow-up question is, would that person have told you, is there a person who could have guided you through this process? That if you'd known to go look for them, you could have found them a year ago?
I ask myself that every signature. Man, so Bahram, how long have we been working with this company? And it's a different mine site, but we've been working with mines that are with this company. And you've been doing the joint research projects free of charge. You know, we've been doing all kinds of stuff. How long have we been working with them?
At least 6, 7 years.
Okay, at least 6 or 7 years. And, you know, the co-development relationship is different than, like I said, when you try to sell something. We have boots on the ground. We speak the language. We've sold that mine a bunch of other stuff. And yet this still seems to have completely caught everybody off guard, including our advocates and their bosses and everyone involved. Is there someone in the world that knew this process existed? There had to be, because somebody typed up the form, right?
They invented it just for you.
Maybe, you never know. Like maybe it's a new thing, right? It feels like a new thing, but someone had to have, but for some reason it wasn't shared, even though they really, really, really want our stuff. And even the finance guys are like, whoa, we really want your stuff. But for some reason it caught us off guard. I don't have a great explanation. This is, like, don't tell my boss we're saying this. Well, he knows. But even then, with all of that stuff, all of that process we built, the relationship, all of this knowledge, we knew to be on the lookout for the steps of the capital approval process. This one still caught us off guard. So even with all of that prep, it was still a surprise. Now, are there 5 finance guys just laughing right now as we navigate this? Probably. But it caught us, all of the people involved, very much off guard. And it's an exception, but you run into smaller versions of that.
I'm just going to say that for all of you startups that are trying to put equipment into some of these big companies, find somebody like Mike or somebody has been there and been successful just before you, and say, what did you have to do? And if they say, I had to get 27 signatures on a document, you at least know what you're in for. So talk to people that have been there just before you and how they got their equipment in there is a really good idea.
Thank you all very much. I do want to make one last point, which is, Michelle, I think you brought this up earlier, or somebody brought this up, about not knowing the cost of things. I think this is a great example of not knowing the cost of things. I wonder what the cost of each signature was in terms of the efficiencies that company could have had if they deployed this a year ago. And then maybe the last thing I'll say is I hear Ontario has a Minister of Red Tape, and we might be getting one soon. I wonder if there's going to be a chief red tape officer in the future of some of these companies. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything silly in response to that, but Madison, how are we doing for time? I have more questions, but we could open it up for Q&A.
We got one more question.
One more question? Okay. Some of you have seen my email, I think. Anything in, no? For Michelle. She asked me to send it to her on Monday, so of course I sent it to her this morning. Sorry, Michelle. Yeah, there's, I could pick, but if nobody remembers or has preferences. Okay, here's a really open-ended one. So we talked about a bunch of stuff today. what are the pitfalls we missed? Like, what are some big stopping points that we didn't cover, or opportunities to go faster even? Like, how do you find the guy who knows about the 27 signatures? Jason, you want to start? Sorry. If I'm throwing you under the bus.
I'll say something. Whether I'm right on this, I don't know, but this advocacy thing is a really, really good point, because every company that you will potentially work with will have one of these people that'll be able to tell you all of the stuff you need to know. It's a great, great piece of advice. Just don't piss the person off. Don't be needy. Don't call them up every 5 minutes and say, "Hey, where's the purchase order? What's the timeline on this?" You have to really foster a good relationship with that person. I've had a lot of people call me and be too needy, and you end up getting very frustrated with the vendor, and the relationship gets tarnished from there on. And it could mean that they don't want to do business with you again. It's that simple. The human relationship that you have with these advocacy people, or these advocates in these companies, is just as important as the actual product that you're trying to develop and the value that you want to provide to these companies, believe it or not.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry.
The question was about pitfalls, other pitfalls.
Yeah, just like, what did we miss? Is there anything that comes to mind that...
Well, there's many, many, many more pitfalls with these big companies, but I think one of the ones that I think Alicia probably brought up was, at the end of the day, I lost my train of thought. I forget where we was going with this, but there's lots of pitfalls, and I'll come back to them.
All right. So go home tonight and type into ChatGPT sales process. And you wouldn't think, that there are steps, but there are. And developing advocacy is one of the common steps. And it can be a SaaS sales process or hardware. Most of the steps are the same. Understanding who the decision makers are, understanding how the finance scheme works. These are all things we've been talking about. And so I think, with 10 simple steps that anybody can go find after this tonight, it can give you some guidance on some shortcuts, because those steps, like I said, they don't need to always come in sequence. And so that can save a lot of time if you're doing like 5 things at once. But if you try to learn it iteratively, it's going to drag. So, I think that's a big piece of this, is what is your sales process now, what's missing, and what can you get in there so you can streamline it a little bit.
It hasn't come back to me, so I'll let you do it.
Okay, pitfalls of this industry. Maybe just to end up on the fact that, there are a lot of, there's reasons why they are large ships that turn and move very slowly. They have done the same thing that they've been doing kind of for years. It's hard for them to accept innovation, and it's just the nature of who they are. But look at the success of, there are lots of companies. I just don't want us to end on the negative sense. So I want to say there are a lot of companies who have built awesome products and gotten them through all these hurdles, and therefore built great companies for themselves as part of that. So look to those and connect with those. So there's lots of hope.
Yeah, back to your earlier point, make a painkiller, not a vitamin, right? Is that what have enough value to pull through?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say. So one of the things that Alicia had mentioned was that, your advocate or your champion or whatever the sales terminology is you want to use, a lot of people will rely on that person 100%. And they move all the time, all over the place. They're gone. You've spent hours, weeks, months, years with that advocate, and I'm not here anymore. And so you really, really need to have at least 3 people in that portfolio that you can rely on to help you through that process. So that's one thing for sure. The other thing that anybody that knows me, I preach this all the time, is really don't stop selling and start listening. listening to what the problem is and how you can actually solve the problem rather than selling them your product. Never works. I guarantee you it's not. Just stop selling. And so if you go to those sales methodologies and try and use those, it's not going to work. You have to really, really be careful.
Understand the problem from the customer perspective. I think that's
Yeah.
step one.
Yeah.
So,
Do you wanna add to
no, that's it. I'm listening.
Know the problem.
Yeah, no, great advice all around. I'll go look up sales process when I get home. But yeah, as an engineer, I hate selling, honestly. I would rather sit down and talk about how do we solve this together than try and sell something to someone. So if any of you, I know, but nobody taught me that. You know, like where was that 10 years ago? So if there are engineers in the room who have to sell things, like hopefully don't be like young me. Q&A?
Yeah.
Open it up.
So I'll bring the mic so that we can catch the sound.
I see a hand up there. We're gonna. Oh,
What was the hand you were pointing at?
right back there.
Okay.
It's been there for a while. Maybe we could get people to, if you want to ask a question, maybe line up like right here, and then we don't have to do. Not being massive.
I'll make my way over. As a frequent flyer and a user of YVR for so many years, oh, those kiosks, they're quite nice. They're now dated, and they're no longer as nice as they once were. And most of the airports in the world have moved on. And even upstairs, the Americans now, it's way faster. So you guys also are getting probably, I think, the most money in the world for airport improvement taxes than anybody else. So my question to you is this. How much is motivated by they're complaining, and how much is motivated by we want to be the best? Because I'm not seeing we want to be the best. And I want you to answer this truthfully, because this is a trick question, because more is coming. So come on.
All right, let's
Wow.
do this.
I didn't think I was coming here to get roasted. But here we are. Interesting concept. I suppose if we want to talk about our lovely Border Express kiosks, which we still love, and we still think are the best in the world, we are beholden to CBSA, so we have to work with them. They haven't quite moved at the same pace as other countries like the United States to modernize the biometric journey and all of those bits and pieces. So there's a little bit of catch-up that they're doing. We're actually working with them on some initiatives which I can't really talk about, but there is some potential changes coming in the future from a border control perspective. You mentioned airport improvement taxes, and YVR is still the lowest airport improvement tax in Canada, so that's all I want to say about that.
I was going to also point out that there's such a gap in what people are willing to spend that if you do notice, Visa and some other companies now charge you to go to the front of the line, showing that the system is actually broken and that people will pay $30 just to get on the plane faster. So from an airport improvement perspective, you guys could charge a lot more because people just don't want to wait on the damn line. So there's no reason why it can't be done tomorrow.
All right, next question.
Can we get another round of beers?
That's a hard act to follow. I'm going to be much friendlier. So, just so you know where I'm coming from, my background, I'm an engineer, been selling widgets into large-scale manufacturing plants around the world for 20 years. And when you were talking about all the financial stuff, my head was doing this. Because when you're selling into large organizations, and in my case, industrial manufacturing, most recently solar, then you need to get in the budgeting process for the Capex and the plant expansion process, because that drives the Capex budgeting. And the Capex budgeting has about 1 million people arguing for their pet projects. And if the fiscal year is January to December, that starts in March, and it gets formalized in September. Can you comment on your experience with this?
Similar. So I forgot to mention the CapEx budget piece of this. And there's a huge timing component. It's usually tied to the calendar year, but not always. So you need to know how that works. And again, you can have the advocacy and everything's going great, but then once you kind of work everything out, it's January 30th and you're up a creek for a year because it didn't get into the budget. Now, obviously, companies make decisions mid-cycle, and so you can go through that, but that's its own process. Yes, I've experienced it, to answer your question, and that's part of kind of understanding the rules of the game, but that's a very important rule, the CapEx budgeting process, and how you help your advocate win the fight against those other departments. And again, if you can dollarize it, that's the in the way that the company sees it, that's the number one way. But yes, I forgot the timing piece of the CapEx budget, super important.
And one other thing that I experienced and learned through painful experience, you actually made me feel traumatized again by reminding me about all these things.
I thought you said you were the friendly guy.
That's friendly for me, was the importance of building up the relationships, not just with the advocates, but also deploying your product team and your sales team and having the right sales team to be able to make friends and be in with the divisional controllers and the CFO, everybody who participates and has a say in that capital budgeting exercise. So I guess what I'm saying is I really liked what you were saying because you were oriented around how the money flows. And it's in a mass manufacturing environment, I think that's far more important than anything else. That's not really a question, but a comment.
Thank you. Quick question. So I used to work with a fellow that had a oil and gas startup, and being a startup and trying to get into the industry with these large companies with long timelines, what happened is they did a 2-year trial, and over those 2 years, their internal engineering department worked around the patents, and 2 years later, they said, thanks. We don't need any more from you. So that company actually folded eventually. Can you comment on strategies for IP protection and how you would structure your sales and trials for startups?
Great question.
It really depends on the underlying company or the underlying product. But definitely, like in your actual sales process, in your engagement with your customer, you have to have clear boundaries of where, especially if you're doing something that is, you're co-creating or you're doing like a JV of any sort, you have to have something that really is clear of what is your IP, what is their IP, how any new IP will be allocated between yourselves. So number one recommendation on that is just make sure you have a friendly lawyer to go talk to as you're going to set up contracts with a new customer.
Yeah, not much to add to that other than you need to have an IP strategy. And that is, going into with that particular strategic partner, you're going to have it all laid out in terms of what's going to happen with that IP. Is it going to be joint IP? And you really have to have it planned out before you even get in there, for sure.
I think the only other piece I'll add is if you are putting together an IP strategy, and let's just say you've got one and it's robust, it's great, make sure you defend it. That's the only thing.
You talk about the money side of IP.
Well, so this is kind of the businessy perspective. You don't trust anybody. That is funny, but I'm serious. And so if somebody can take your tech and work around it, your patents, or reverse engineer it, what's going to happen when you sell it? Probably the same thing. So any keep all of your secrets and be a little paranoid about it, because if a business can save a lot of money by screwing you, it's very tempting. And when you have guys who are really excited about tech, they want to talk about it. And so, I love a lot of our customers and I have deep trust with them. I'm not paranoid completely, but I don't share intellectual property or secrets ever. That's kind of just my approach. And that's what I would recommend. Do not trust your customers with your intellectual property.
Just going to bet on that on one point, because I've seen the opposite also happen. To do that, just get really clear about what are your secrets. Don't approach your customer thinking like everything is a secret, when actually, some really standard stuff is just,
Only the secret.
only the secrets. Get really clear what that is.
I have a question, but just a quick qualifier before. Mike, were you with Motion Metrics before the acquisition by Weir, or after? Were you with them through that process?
I was the head of acquisition.
Okay. At Weir or on Motion Metrics team?
Weir.
Okay. So just it'll make sense why I'm asking that question, but when I'm in venture and when we look at our portfolio companies, there's a very distinct relationship that you have with your customers, but once it becomes apparent that that customer could turn into a potential buyer of the business or a potential target for acquisition, that relationship changes, and trying to balance that customer relationship with potentially building a relationship towards an acquisition is something that takes 3, 5, 7 years, and that we see is really challenging across our portfolio and have to be managed in a very specific way, different from other customers. So the question specifically for you, Alicia, on the venture side, and you, Mike, was as the former head of acquisitions at Weir, is how do you recommend founders start to think about that, and how do you recommend that people start to navigate that relationship when that opportunity presents itself and they find themselves in the position of needing to change their approach?
So, it's a really good question, because ultimately, when you're first bringing a technology, a product into market, you are trying to get different customers. Depending on the market, the product, some of those customers might end up becoming ultimately an acquirer of your company. So how do you change your position with them? I think the way to think about this is combination of things. Again, is obviously being very careful with IP. Like the main things you need to keep close for your company is both your IP, and then also kind of your, there's all this information about your business, your pricing, et cetera, that can be commercially sensitive. So both of those things are the things to think about. To answer your question more specifically, I think we think of it very much from kind of different levels of partnership, and that you can start with, demonstrating how you work together, helping a potential acquirer understand the value that the acquirer's business can get from working with your company, and therefore, they start thinking, okay, great, if we acquire this company, here's all this amazing value. So I think there's a path there where you can start small and be sensitive to the kind of risk of going too far. Let me stop there and pass it on.
I don't know. Ask me an Apple question.
So I'm the don't trust anybody guy, but that's my preferred way. Is you start with some sort of joint project, NRE or something, but a lot of times you're in a mid-sized company, this is a big company, it's just kind of like wham bam kind of situation, but that's I think the best way, and it depends on why the acquisition is occurring. Are you buying an asset? Are you buying tech? Are you acquiring talent? And with Motion Metrics, they had great, and I was also acquired by Weir. So I was acquired, and then I was part of an acquisition of Motion Metrics. When we evaluated Motion Metrics for where the value was, what were we getting? There was some great tech, there were some sales, and there was a ton of talent. And so as acquisition head, my goal was to protect those assets and grow them. And so it was it's been tumultuous, because when a small company is bought by a big company, there are all these changes. Some I was a fan of and some I didn't like, but had to happen. But it was always about protecting the asset, and I was drawn to that duty because the asset was all these great people. And so I think that's a piece of it. You got to understand what the acquirer wants. Do they want just this invention? Do they want another business unit? Do they want access to market? What are they trying to get? And again, this is a very businessy guy thought process. What am I buying? And what's the value there? And what can I turn that into later? And so if you're looking to get acquired, just like we've been saying with all the sales talk, you have to understand what the person on the other side of the table really wants. So you can learn that through the partnerships, but they're not always going to want to acquire the same thing. So I think getting to know any of the big acquisitions that Weir does starts with a relationship, usually at the top level. Get to know these people. We got to know, Shahram 10 years ago. If you guys know Dr. Shahram Tafazoli, founder of Motion Metrics, that was a conversation that started a decade ago and then turned into an acquisition 7 years ago. We didn't do a joint project, but that process was a good process, I think. So again, you got to understand, is this going to work for both of us, and what can I provide the acquirer?
My question is for you, Mike. You could probably talk about this for hours, and I think we probably need more context as well, but is there a key thing that you would have done differently to accelerate the signatures that you got, or the remaining signatures? Or is there a red flag that, in hindsight, you could have seen that would have helped you avoid getting into this situation at all? And if those questions are too hard, then what's the most important thing that helped you get those 21 signatures at all? Because that's already a lot of signatures.
Okay, so how to get the signatures, how to get the signatures faster?
Or is there anything that you would have done differently?
Okay, so first off, in hindsight, try to figure out that we need these 27 signatures, because what you can do is, at least understand by job title or department where this thing has got to kind of fish its way through, and you can start to work with them. We could have started working with them months ago. I don't think we could have avoided the 27 signatures, but we could have made it go really fast and kind of done some pre-work there. So I think in hindsight, that would be one. And then now that I know we needed 27 signatures, probably manage expectations within our company. Like, hey, I got to get 27 signatures. This might take a while. But that's kind of like a corporate problem. But if anything we could have done to socialize and kind of prep the signees, that would have been what, in hindsight, what we would do. I'm still missing 6. So, maybe some more lessons to learn before this is all done.
One thing about a lot of these processes and that people forget is that I see a lot of companies that are just kind of sit back and wait for the person at the company who needs to go get the signatures But if you find out that you need those signatures, you can help kind of push it along a bit. You can tell them like, oh, have you asked this person? Okay, now you got this person, now you need to go with that person. So the more you know about the process, the more you can help guide the process. And don't be afraid to actually that's what the role. Don't wait for it to happen to you. Don't, you go and see, you go and push that process forward.
Yeah, so there should never be an action item in your CRM system that says waiting for anything. Oh, sorry, over there.
Sorry, I should have come all the way there. Obviously, the title today, cracking, essentially cracking into Capex heavy industries. We talked a lot about how you get and keep those early adopters happy. Less about how do you cross the chasm into the early majority and kind of continue to scale. But I imagine all four of you probably have some insights to share here. Can you touch on what that takes, what that journey is like, and how it's different, how to either relearn or learn new things to enable that journey? I don't know who wants to start.
So a bit of terminology being discussed here, right? Early adopter is your first customer. It takes something to just get that customer, prove the technology, and then, crossing the chasm to the early majority. Now you're looking to get many different customers. What do you have to do differently? I mean, one of the pains is that it's a lot of the same, actually. Right? Each new corporate entity, corporate customer, and sometimes, even if you, have done a great job at one mine, it's, like you're one mine and you go work with the other mine of, in the same company, you're still starting from scratch. So there's still a bit that process that has to happen because in Capex intensive industries, again, there's those barriers. The inertia hasn't, not made here, that type of thing. What does happen differently is that you do start, the main thing that happens is you now have a reference customer. And that becomes a bit of a superpower where depending on their reputation in market, you can kind of leverage them to kind of push other people forward, and that becomes something that can accelerate your process.
And I think that the question is really around what can you do differently when you do get to the point where you're seeing some scalability? Is that?
Yeah, and what do you need to do differently for groups who may have less innovation in their blood? Like they may not be targeted, like they may not be culturally oriented as an organization to seek out new technology.
Right.
How do you have to shift? What do you have to do maybe different in a product revision? And what has to happen? What have you seen happen successfully?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing, just more of it. But I think with all these big industries, they do most of their buying based on what their peers are doing. So I can tell you a story, and it's happened this week. Big, huge oil and gas company, a startup company I'm working with said, we're selling units to such and such operation in Alberta to this oil and gas company. And I said, that's fantastic. I said, what's revenues look like? We said, probably about $1 million. So I just so happened to know the senior manager at that particular oil and gas company. And I phoned them and I said, hey, I'd really like some feedback. What's the value proposition here? What are you getting back from this particular product? And goes, I don't know anything about this. Senior manager, and he goes, also, the research and innovation manager and his boss don't know anything about this. So I guess my point is that it's more customer references, more and more and more, because every one of those businesses buy for a different reason. So this is the reason why this particular mining company bought this camera or what have you. This is why this particular mining company, more and more and more and more reference sites, because everybody buys differently. So they'll keep seeing their peers, and that's really what gets some of these big companies to move. So that's kind of what I'm seeing.
My context probably won't help here, but as an airport authority, selling stuff to other airports, the only piece that we were very cautious of is our risk appetite with certain international places. Sometimes that's part of it, I think. That's why I thought I'd offer that, because just as much as you want to have customers, you want to make sure you have good customers. So doing a bit of a risk or mini risk assessment on them can go a long way, maybe.
I think the reference site customer is great advice, because then you can really have a focused energy investment like you're working with these guys and, we're solving problems. You can make them really happy instead of getting spread thin. You can, do some customized solution creation as well. And then, if you work that into, of course, multiple sales, so that's got to be a piece of it. You cover the whole site, and co-presenting at conferences. One of our reference sites presented at a conference in Chile this summer. They told us about it, but we didn't accompany them. I don't think, did we, Bahram? No. Well, I mean, we had people there, but we didn't present. It's like, okay, and it was a big company. So people or customers who might have been skeptical, like, is this legit? I don't know that they learned whether it was legit or not, but they learned that these other people were paying money and a little bit of FOMO and some cred, and it created a lot of buzz for us. A lot of times the reference sites are reluctant to go, public with their support. So you want to try to work that as much as you can. But again, in mining, you'll have a company, but all the decisions are made at the different sites. So that at least spreads around that big company. So I think that's good advice for scaling. And then back to the subscription question, Taylor, that you had asked a while ago. So subscription, we thought that would be the key to avoiding Capex, but like I said, doesn't really work that way. But what it is it's a lower barrier to entry, a lower risk, depending on what the cancellation policy is. And so that's something where some of these big companies who might be tech adverse, or maybe they don't see your solution as mission critical yet, can dip their toe in, see what you're all about, and follow this reference customer that's kind of leading the way. But when you have that, you got to be ready with field service, customer success, all these other groups to help make that foray a success, so then you can spread within the site. But I think the reference site that's great first step.
That's in the same book, Crossing the Chasm. They talk a lot about how a product is actually an ecosystem, and to get to maturity, you need to have that whole ecosystem built out, which is what Jason, you were talking about that as well.
Yeah, hi. I come from the product management background and usually have served into hardware, let's say solar energy, a couple of startups as well. My question is to Mike and probably to you as well. One of the stages is prototyping. In software, we can call it MVP or that kind of terminology. So prototyping is one of those roadblocks in the hardware space, especially that takes a lot of time because there's a market research and then the prototype comes in. The business teams has different expectations, and there's a lot of back and forth. There could be import challenges. If you are, for example, EVs nowadays in Canada could be a challenge. So there's so many factors to it. So one of the things which I did was to create a prototyping process at the previous startup. I was very naive at it, but I somehow did it. So my question to you guys is like, in motion metrics specifically, what is your prototyping process? How do you expedite the prototyping, even though you are B2B and I have been more into B2C? And second, when you got merged with Weir, has it slowed down or has it changed over the period? Because that's a big organization. Some of the things at a startup or early age we expedite based upon internal discussion, but in a bigger organization there's a lot of red tapeism and there's a lot of process. Thank you.
All right. So we have a lot of members of the senior leadership team for Motion Metrics here today, and we had our strategic offsite, at Whistler. Had the drinks and the pizza and the zip lining and all the good stuff. But when we got down to like the serious conversation of what was missing, and we were even talking about it today, it's speed. And I don't know what that is exactly, but I know Motion Metrics was a lot faster before Weir. Yeah. But we're also a little too loose with some stuff that maybe we shouldn't have been. So we're trying to strike that balance. It's been a learning. So to answer the question, we're slower, I think, now that Weir has acquired us. And so now that we've kind of gone through that, it's how do we get back to the fast piece? On prototyping, Motion Metrics is very fast when it comes to like getting a beta. But like I said, with this international sales force, the beta level only works with a few key customers. The 300 other people who have to sell the product are not going to want to or know how to manage expectations with the beta. So where we got to get faster is like that perfection step. And I like that vitamin versus medicine. Painkiller versus vitamin. That's a great way. My boss is an Army guy, so he talks about mission critical. But we want to be mission critical. We want to be so important that the mines feel like they cannot operate well without us. And the only way you can do that is if you have like perfect or close to perfect products. So I think from a speed perspective, again, I got half the team here. That's where we need to focus. But there's speed all over the place, and I think you get it through efficiency. I think you get it by saying no to certain things. You got to like prioritize. That's a big piece of it. But we are not as fast as we used to be. But we're going to get back. We're going to get it back quick. I will say this too. We are hiring. And so if you know how to go fast, come talk to me. I want to go fast.
This is going to be our last question.
I come from the consumer electronics hardware industry where, and my experience with startups is that the Capex that you raise from your investors is the hardest part of the cash to get. So since we're talking about Capex heavy industries, I'm curious, I think mostly for Alicia, if you have advice that you give to the founders who have to go fundraise around how they talk about the fundraising part, especially since they have to spend a lot on Capex. And if you're talking about spending on Capex and selling subscription, there's a lot that your CFO is probably going to raise an eyebrow at there.
Okay. So capital intensive industries, you have to raise, you are building a hardware product. There is, to do your first iteration, there's a certain kind of BOM cost to do that. And for these industries, that can be in the, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, depending on, the specific product. The main thing, there is an industry out there of venture VCs who are kind of interested in this space because they see that the outcomes in this space are really attractive. So going back to that value creation that you create, if you can create a lot of value with your product, then ultimately you can get through these barriers and you can sell it. And there's a set of professional VCs, but anyone, angel investors, if you can kind of convince them that there is a financial case for them giving you that amount of Capex and that you are going to be a good shepherd of that and build a good business, that money will show up. So it's not easy, but there is an industry out there to support that. My big piece of advice on that front is to just think about, also because for founders, try to think about it from the perspective of how do you be as capital efficient as possible. So try not to make, the first prototype or the first iterations, to the nth degree, to, with all the bells and whistles, really kind of MVP for that initial step. Raise as little as you can to get there. Oh, sorry.
I'm not on the panel, but I want to interject because your problems are somewhat related, and there's a way we think about this stuff, I would say. So you said you're building like a consumer electronic device, or like a company or somebody is? Yes. Okay. You're going to have the same problem Mike is talking about, where it's going to be relatively easy for you to get to beta, but it's going to be very hard for you to get to 95 or 100% in a way that a consumer will be like, I will buy this. This is a problem we encounter a lot at MistyWest, and there's some stuff I can send you guys, but we follow a process called rapid learning cycles, and it's really, the whole thing is about understanding risk. It's about, at the very beginning of the process, understand where your uncertainty and your risk is in the product, and then decide how to tackle that as efficiently as possible. So like some of the best engineering cultures in the world, they don't do waterfall for hardware. What they do, like Tesla, they have these things called technology spikes, where if they want to say add Bluetooth to their car so you can unlock it with your phone, they don't build a whole new car to test that. What they do is they hack apart one of their existing cars and they test the core parts where they're uncertain before they go and roll that out into their products. So I think all the points about fundraising, yes, but the other thing I would say too is like, the best part is no part, to quote somebody who might be in government soon. And the best requirement is no requirement. So like really digging into that uncertainty and being careful at the start. What is it? It's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's like that, but times 100 in product development.
Can I ask you a question? Specific to your situation.
Sure.
Like, what is the capital for? Is it for like R&D type, or is it? I had a question. So what's the capital for? Is it for manufacturing? Is it for, office space? What are you using it for?
The majority of the capital that we expend is for inventory.
Inventory.
Consumer business, like
Working capital, not CapEx. Okay.
Well, and also I assume that in this industry, the Capex to produce the products might also be a lot higher than the six-figure budget that I extend for tooling and production line setup, because my COGS is $150, not
Yep.
$1,000.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was manufacturing. It's all a financial bet. And so if you haven't proven a return, you're going to have a hard time getting that money. I wouldn't give it to somebody who, had an idea. And so it depends on how far you've been able to, show that you can solve a problem and get something back. But I think MistyWest is a great example. I think, a lot of contract manufacturers who are more boutique are also places where you can leverage their capital that, we're talking factories or specialized equipment, even semiconductor fabs, there were boutique ones that you can work with. They're not going to be cheap, but if you drop like 50 million, 200 million, or even 5 million and you're wrong, that's a big deal. So usually when you're early enough on in that product development process, it's hard to make that level of bet. So my advice is you spend a little bit more, convince your investors like, hey, short term this is pain, but long term it's going to save us money because we'll know the answer, and then we're able to go all in. When it comes to inventory, working capital, so I'm a supply chain guy, so we can talk about that over the next 7 beers, but we can talk about that later.
I think the question's over here.
So I just got a simple question. I hope it's loud enough. My basic question is, what is the average time you have spent waiting for a client in the waiting room? How long do you wait for a client in the waiting room if you're selling something?
As long as it takes.
Like in their office?
Office, waiting to meet them. What is the average time you think you have spent waiting to meet one of these guys?
I mean, if I'm flying to Australia to talk to a customer, I'm going to wait a little bit. But as again, supply chain guy who buys a lot of stuff, who was the customer, one of the things I learned early on in my career, I worked with this sales guy, and he was, how do I describe this? He was not a pushover, but he wasn't a jerk. He just demanded respect, and he was a professional. And I think, I always tell my teams, let's be kind, but don't allow yourself to be disrespected. So if this wait, who knows what the wait is for? It could be something completely out of their control, but if, sometimes you do work with these companies and they're going to disrespect you, And waiting around and letting them do that isn't going to change that situation. It's only going to embolden them. And so it's not worth it if that's the case. But, you know, like I said, if I'm flying to Perth, I'll wait an hour to talk to a customer as long as it's not a disrespectful situation.
So.
I guess, you know, if you do your homework properly, there's less and less and less chance of you flying to Perth and you sitting there waiting, right? I'm not, you know, you're going to be, you've validated this customer. There's a problem that you're solving for them. They've offered you, you're going to come. There may be, I mean, I've been in sawmills where all of a sudden there's somebody's been hurt, and of course you have to wait and wait and wait. That makes total sense. But if you are there and they've asked you to come there, generally, they're not. You know, there's a reason why they're making you wait. But to your point, if you've done all your homework properly and you've crossed off all the things you need to cross off, very seldom you're going to have those customers making you wait. So.
Maybe just a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists.